Welcome to our July webinar here by popular demand from all of you. I've got my dear friend and brother from another mother, Naveen Jain, and we're going to be talking about an exciting company called Viome. And to go, again, full disclosure, my venture fund, Bold, is an investor in Viome. But at the end of the day, we've gone to this over and over again that we honestly don't fully know what's going on inside our bodies. And we also don't know which of our genes are turned on or turned off. And we're going to go into some detail about what is, for me, the most exciting part of Viome, which is the science, which is the extraordinary work that they're doing. Naveen, welcome. Hello from the British Virgin Islands on your side and Santa Monica on my side. Good to see you.
Good to see you, brother. First of all, it's always such a pleasure to talk with you, Peter. It's such an optimism in your voice, and your tribe is just so amazing that always looking forward to the positive news.
Well, thank you, buddy. Let me take a second and properly introduce you for everybody and read your bio. So Naveen is intensely curious and never gives up. He's an entrepreneur who loves focusing on audacious ideas. He's the author of an award-winning book called Moonshots. He is the founder, CEO of Viome and Moon Express, a serial entrepreneur. Past companies include Infospace, Intellius, and TalentWise, all incredibly successful financial exits. And Viome, which we'll be talking about today, his mission is to make illness optional, which really means make it obsolete, because who wants illness anyway, right? They've built an AI-driven platform that analyzes the interaction between food, our microbes in our body, and our human cells in order to develop precision nutrition. In addition, he is the vice chairman of the board for Singularity University, where he is helping myself, Eric Anderson, and a number of the team there really build our organization. Last but not least, he's a member of our Vision Circle and our board of trustees of the X Prize Foundation. So, Naveen, good to have you. Welcome.
Well, good. Well, thanks a lot, Peter. It's always a pleasure.
So, everybody, we're going to be getting your questions as we go forward. So, Naveen, I remember when you called me about Viome, you were starting it and how excited you were. It's really important to take a second and talk about the origination of this technology, where it came from. And then I want you to tell me where you've taken it through, where you've taken it to.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Peter. So a couple of things I was going to say that, you and I both know that anytime you're doing these audacious ideas, you have to have a framework of why do you want to do this, right? And I have this framework called why this, why now, why me? And why this is, God forbid you're actually successful in solving this problem, would it help 1 billion people live a better life? In this case, we said, what if we can prevent and reverse chronic diseases, cancer, and aging? Would that be worthwhile? Would it help 1 billion people? And the answer was 7.4 billion people, check mark. The next question you ask yourself is, why now? I mean, what has really happened? And this is a tricky question. What has changed in the last year to 2 years? But most importantly, what do you expect to happen in the next 3 to 5 years? And can you intercept these exponential technologies to solve the problem that were unsolvable even half a decade ago? And that's the thing, right? So in this case, we all know that you have to be able to digitize the human body. That means cost of sequencing had to be coming down. Decode the human body, that means cost of processing the data has to come down, and decipher the human body, that means cost of AI and the powerful AI that can actually make sense of it. And it was pretty clear to all of us, and Peter, especially you, and under your shadow, that it was happening. What was surprising to us was, and which is really what I think I learned from you, Peter, is that it doesn't matter how much you expect the exponential technology to happen, but the pace it happens, it surprises even the believers, right? So when we saw the cost of sequencing was $1,000, and we all said, in the next 3-4 years, it'll come down to $100. And we all felt good that it's 10x in 3-4 years. What really happened was came down to $15. And that's not something we expected, right? So that's really amazing when we thought the cost of processing will come down. But the most important part, and I'm going to come down and answer your question, was why me? And this is really the critical part. While everyone in the industry was focused on looking at the DNA and genes, everyone was starting to see, hey, what's happening with these microbes in our body? And they wanted to focus on what microbes are there or what genes do you have. In our opinion, our way of looking at was very different. We say, your DNA does not change when you become diabetic. Your DNA doesn't change when you get depression or obesity or any of these diseases. Then what is actually changing is your gene expression, not your genes. And what if you can measure gene expression? Same type of thing. A lot of literature was coming out 5 years ago that your gut microbes are really important. And people were thinking, what if I knew what organisms are in your gut? And we say, wait a sec. What if the same organisms can be doing something beneficial in Peter's gut and something harmful in my gut, just like a human beings? In bad environment, you do bad things, good environment, you do good things. So what if we can focus on what they are doing? And I went on this journey. Can we actually analyze mRNA or gene expression at a scale? And now this 4-letter word mRNA is on top of our vocabulary. 5 years ago, it wasn't. And we were this, novel concept of looking at mRNA and somehow trying to understand of it. And there was nobody else doing it. And the origination of this technology actually was at Los Alamos National Lab, where they were working on a biodefense project to understand, because they needed to know what antidote to build if there was a biological terror. And they say they needed to know the mRNA so they know exactly what antibiotics resistance it is to, what is it producing that they can do something with it. And that is the origination of the technology.
Let me slow this down. Let me slow this down for everybody a second. So, if you have the DNA of a particular organism, you can identify what organism it is, but you don't know which of its genes are actually turned on and what proteins it's producing. But if you can look at not its DNA, but its messenger RNA, in other words, which part of its DNA is actually transcribed and then in ribosomes made into proteins, then you know actually what it's doing. You can have one single microbe in your gut and it comes up on a DNA evaluation. But if you've got, a lot that are transcribing something that's not good for you, that's a problem. So what Viome, I want to get to the human transcriptomic sides very, very quickly a little bit. But what you did so well is give people an understanding of in their gut, what microbes are actually expressing, what proteins. How is that affected by the food you eat before and after? And then you took the next step, which is, can we take a blood sample from somebody and find out which genes are turned on and which genes are turned off? We've talked about this before, the work of Dr. David Sinclair, who I've introduced you to, on the epigenome. Yeah.
Yes. And that's actually, Peter, the interesting thing is we as humans are not isolated. We are constantly in network of these organisms in our gut, organisms in our saliva, and our own human genes. They are constantly interacting with each other. And that interaction can be inflammatory or anti-inflammatory. And in fact, now shown, Peter, we just got the FDA breakthrough device designation, where we showed the FDA that when certain microbes are changing their own gene expression, they in turn are turning down the tumor suppression gene and actually increasing the gene expression of the oncogenes. And that is what causing many of the cancer. In this case, we were able to come up with a biomarker for the early stage oral cancer and throat cancer. And now we saw the similar type of mechanism for colorectal cancer, autoimmune diseases. And now we are working on 2 vaccine indications for colorectal cancer and also for autoimmune disease. And it's really interesting that if you look at the cancer, what is most interesting, I think, to me, and I think, Peter, it will come as a surprise to most people, is that now we are finding that there are microbes inside the tumor, each one of these solid tumor. And here was the part that surprised the hell out of me, that the tumor are actually displaying the microbial peptide on the surface of the tumor. Think for a second here. Why would the tumor, an organism, want to not protect itself and invite the immune system to attack unless these microbes are displaying the peptide, declaring itself as self, so immune system actually doesn't attack it. So essentially biomimicking of these peptides, which are similar to the human peptides, is actually protecting the tumors against the immune system. So this is literally, as we are learning now, that even the immunotherapy drug, there was a research that just came out that did immunotherapy on these melanoma. All they did was they did a fecal transplant, change the microbiome, and the immunotherapy started to work. So imagine what's happening. Your microbes are interacting with the immune system and allowing the certain drugs to work, or increasing their efficacy or reducing their toxicity, right? What's more interesting is how our microbes are controlling our insulin, and how insulin itself actually is inflammatory and itself could be actually a reason for many of these chronic diseases. And I was wondering that if you allow me to introduce Dr. Tenton, who is actually here with us, who is a Dr. Damon Tenton. He's a head of epidemiologist at Advent Health and our chief medical officer. He is actually some very interesting new research on how insulin and most of the chronic diseases, how they actually come together and how human gene expressions are changing.
Hi, Damon, welcome. You want to unmute yourself and say hello?
Hello. Thanks for having me.
A pleasure.
So, Damon, talk about a little bit about the insulin resistance and how that's a core to many of the chronic diseases, and how microbes and all the things that Viome is doing is actually working together.
Yeah, so, we focus on the end product of insulin resistance. We focus on cardiovascular disease, diabetes, stroke. But really what we should be doing is trying to figure out the cause of the precursors. And the precursor for 70% of disease is insulin resistance. So hyperinsulinemia, or high insulin levels, is an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease, meaning that it doesn't matter what the sugar is. All that matters is that the insulin is high, and that causes inflammation. And then the inflammatory process leads to the disease. We also know that higher insulin levels lead to higher risks of all cancer, and it's across the board. And it's tightly aligned with obesity, of course. And the question always is, well, what comes first, obesity or insulin resistance, or insulin resistance causing obesity? It's actually a pretty vicious cycle. And we find that if we can get in front of the insulin rises, we can prevent or postpone the vast majority of disease. So I think, the reason I joined Viome is that I think the secret is in the microbiome, because I've always been frustrated that I can't get to the cause of insulin resistance. I know the cause of disease, metabolic disease is insulin, but why do people develop high insulin levels? And I really think it has to do with the microbiome. So what we're looking at is kind of deciphering, trying to decode what actually leads to insulin resistance.
Amazing. And so, it's, we've heard about the microbiome now for what, Naveen, 5, 6, 7
Decade?
years.
But
it's just now beginning to realize the impact it has on moods, on foods, on everything. And you've had some recent, incredible success on science publications. Can you just take a second and just to rattle off for people who want to understand the scientific validity of Viome, some of the stuff that you've demonstrated? And Damon, thank you for that, by the way. Yeah.
So first of all, Peter, I think what you're referring to is that we actually proved that if you simply analyze your gut microbiome, understand what they're doing, and accordingly adjust your diet and nutrition. That means understand what supplements are good for you, what supplements are not good for you, what foods you should be eating and what foods you should be avoiding. So not necessarily the vitamin B3 is good for everyone, not necessarily the curcumin is good for everyone, not necessarily broccoli is good for everyone. In fact, those are exactly the kind of things that may harm you. So if you have very high uric acid production, you shouldn't be taking vitamin B3, which is glycine. If you have very high bile acid, you shouldn't be taking curcumin. Actually, it's going to harm you because it's going to convert the bile acid into bile salt. Same type of thing, you can look at NMN or NAD. It's good for some people, but when you have high cellular senescence or high inflammation, you shouldn't be taking NMN or or NAD. Same type of thing happens in the food. Broccoli can be harmful to you if you have very high sulfide production in your gut. Spinach can be harmful to you if you have a low sulfate digestion. So what we did was we took the several 10,000 people and we measured them, what happens to them 4 months when we give them the personalized recommendations of food and supplement. And we saw the clinical score of IBS came down by 40%. This is the IBS SSS. The depression score measured by clinically by PHQ-9 came down by 36%. The anxiety score measured by GAD-7 came down by 32%. And here's the interesting one. The diabetes risk score measured by HbA1c came down by 30% simply with food and supplements. And here's more interesting one. We were able to predict if you have diabetes, whether metformin is going to work for you or not. And we can actually show you as you look at your gut and the blood transcriptomics that your risk of developing diabetes is going up or is going down. And we can do that, by the way, simply looking at your gut microbial activity, we can predict your risk of diabetes going up without ever looking at the blood. We are able to predict a glycemic response of a food simply by looking at your gut, that if you eat this food, this is going to be your sugar response in your blood. Because we did a massive study in 2 continents, by the way, 550 people in Japan, 550 people in US, put them in a continuous glucose monitoring, measure their glucose, give them 35,000 different types of food. And then we were able to look at the microbial activity, and we built a machine learning model that can now predict that when you eat this food and this microbial activity, this is going to be the glycemic response. And now we are publishing a whole bunch of papers that, Peter, we have been doing, including, as I mentioned, on early detection of cancer. And we're going to be, in fact, launching a consumer-initiated test called Cancer Detect for early detection of oral cancer and throat cancer. And we are just announcing 2 more vaccines for colorectal cancer and autoimmune disease.
Okay, slow that down a little bit. I want to say this again. So you're working on a test for oral cancer and throat cancer based on
simply with saliva, based on saliva alone.
And what are you getting in saliva? Your microbiome?
So in saliva, we get both the human genes in the saliva, human gene expression in the saliva, and the oral microbial gene expression in saliva. And this is really interesting. Most people think of the mouth as simply to bite the food to make it smaller. What they don't realize is our microbes, the more types of microbes are in our mouth than in our gut. In terms of the diversity of microbes, the oral microbes are higher diversity than gut microbes, whereas the richness is actually higher in the gut. But in terms of the diversity is very high. So when your mother will say, chew your food, she didn't mean to make it smaller. She meant allow the oral microbe to pre-process the food so it is actually ready to be processed by your gut microbiome.
All right. So you've shown that you can predict oral and throat cancer from this test, right? That
yes,
you probably
saliva alone. By the way, we have FDA. No. We have FDA breakthrough device designation on it. It's not just.
That's amazing. Okay. Number 2. Now you started to talk about some additional cancers. Repeat what you said.
So what we're doing now is that now we're starting to understand the mechanism of why different cancers are being formed. So for example, in the colorectal cancer, what we saw was very interesting. There's oral microbe called Fusobacterium nucleatum. And most people have them in the mouth. And then actually a lot of the times it ends up in the gut, especially in people who are taking anti-acid drugs, especially the PPI drugs. And in most cases, it stays commensal. That means it doesn't do anything. And when you look at the prevalence of people who have IBD, IBS, or colorectal cancer, and you match them with other people who don't have the same diseases, but the same gender, same age, the prevalence is the same. But what was interesting was, and by the way, Viome is the only one that could have detected that, the expression of Fusobacterium nucleatum is 479-fold higher in people who have colorectal cancer compared to the same cohort. It is 15-fold higher in IBD, and it is 7-fold higher in IBS. So imagine just the activity of microbes depending on what actually you mentioned, what transcripts are being transcribed at a higher rate. In this particular case, there is a transcript like FBA2 and FAP2 that is causing these toxins to be released by these microbes that causes the onset and progression of these colorectal cancer and other IBD and IBS.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. And tell me, are you thinking that it's causative or correlated? And is there?
So it's very interesting because most people wonder. So the way we did is we also looked at the biopsy of the tumor of colorectal cancer. And it turns out the organism is inside, the Fusobacterium nucleatum animalis is inside the tumor. So imagine, why would that organism be inside the tumor if it is simply a correlation? So that means it's actually causing the onset and progression of that cancer. And we see the activity of this organism increasing as the cancer is progressing from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3, right? We in fact are starting a clinical trial with a pharma partner, and in fact they're developing a vaccine, right? So point I'm trying to make is that now we're looking at pancreatic cancer, bile cancer, breast cancer, ovarian cancer, right? So we're going to go through the oncology space. Other thing we are really focused on is the mental health issues. So as I mentioned, that we're really looking at depression and anxiety, and now we're starting to look at Alzheimer, because all these diseases are now turning out to be, Peter, I think you knew that way back when. These are inflammatory diseases and also they're infectious diseases. So when you look at the pathology of the patients who have Alzheimer, you'll find a massive amount of infection in their brain. Now, this is coming from either the leaky gum, so when your gums are inflamed, the oral microbes going into your blood, or the permeability of the gut, the leaky gut going into your blood, and then the inflammation of the blood-brain barrier that makes it permeable, and suddenly next thing you know, you have infection in the brain. And what you're seeing is an outcome. So amyloid beta and tau is an outcome of glial cells trying to protect itself or protect the brain from the infection, rather than actually the causative of the disease, neurodegenerative disease.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. So I just want to remind everybody, we're going to be going to your questions in about 5 minutes. So please get them ready. There's so much to unpack here. So next step. So right now, let's talk about the services that Viome offers that people can use, because there's three different services, if I remember correctly. Maybe it's more since I've done it. I've done this many times. So would you take it a step at a time?
So Peter, first of all, before we do anything, we test you. So we give you what is happening inside the body. And there are tests right now called health intelligence tests that takes a few drops of your blood and your touch of a stool. And then we tell you, what is your immune health looks like? What does your biological age looks like? What is your mitochondrial health? What is your cellular health? What is your gut health? And then we say, okay, based on all these insights, here are the foods you should be eating and why. Here are the foods you should be avoiding and why. But then we go back into the nutrients and say, look, you really need 17 milligram of elderberry. You need 79 milligram of fisetin. You need 22 milligram of curcumin. And we literally, for each individual, we make those capsules with those ingredients in that quantity for each individual every month. And as your body changes, we constantly adjust your nutrients every single month. And these are made to order for you. All your food extracts, digestive enzymes, minerals, vitamin, herbs, probiotics, prebiotics, everything you can get that are personalized just for you, right? And soon we'll be adding another test, saliva, on top of that. So it's going to be blood, saliva plus stool. It's going to be a health intelligence plus test. Now we'll be able to look at the whole body, top of the tube, bottom of the tube, and the other side of the tube, right? And then literally look at the whole body as such and saying, what do you really need to do to stay healthy?
It is truly amazing. And it's interesting because your microbiome changes over time. And so traditionally you've made this a subscription service where you repeat the test. How often do you recommend people are repeating their Viome tests?
So we recommend every 4 to 6 months. And in fact, you can sign up where we actually give you the test at the beginning at no cost to you. and we send you all the supplements every single month, and probiotics, prebiotics, vitamin, minerals, herbs, food extracts. And then 6 months later, we retest you and keep adjusting. So this literally is a way for you to be able to see how your body is changing, how you're actually becoming younger biologically, even though you and I can want to grow chronologically, but we don't want to grow biologically.
Well, I'm younger than you biologically and chronologically. I remember that.
that is in fact true, Peter. And by the way, and you do look younger. There's no two ways about it.
All right. Anyway, what's the vision 5 years from now? What do you believe is possible 5 or 10 years from now, pal?
Yeah, so I think, brother, I think we live, as you see, in most amazing times in the human history. You look back, you look in 10 years, I believe we will be able to prevent the chronic diseases from happening. That means we will know exactly when we are moving towards a disease, when we are moving away from a disease, we will know what to do with it. And that's why we say making illness optional. I can say, Peter, don't eat that spinach, not good for you. And you say, you know what? I love spinach. I'm going to eat it because Popeye told me so. You know what? That's why we say illness is optional. You get to make a decision. No, I'm going to give you sick. And that's okay. But, but most people will say,
lunch here. Yeah.
But point is, I think we'll be able to prevent these chronic diseases because these are really our matter of choices. This is not something you turn 50, you're supposed to be diabetic. You turn 60, you're going to have these diseases. There's nothing in our biology that says you have to have these diseases. And then we really think, even if you come to us late, some people who are going to be coming to us late will be able to earliest diagnose those diseases while they are still preventable, right? So our job is to be able to prevent them, to be able to predict them, early diagnose them, and then tell them what drug will work or not work. And lastly, develop a precision drugs and therapeutics when everything else has failed to be able to actually still help them.
And also food as a drug, right?
Yes.
What foods you should eat. Dr. Tanton, while we have you on the line here, what do you want to add before we go to our member questions?
Well, I think, I still see clinic every day, and I'm frustrated with the way that our medical situation is set up, where we focus on the disease rather than the prevention. And it's very frustrating to patients to tell them, I'm going to wait until you have the disease, then I'm going to figure out a way to treat that. And so what I've been doing for a long time, but now even more, is focusing on identifying the first cause of pre-disease and then getting in front of that pre-disease before the inflection point that leads to disease, right?
And you've been using Viome in your practice, right, Diamond?
Yes, absolutely. And the idea, take diabetes, for example. Most people say, I got diabetes. I didn't know that I was at risk. Well, type 2 diabetes is never a surprise. So you can see the changes in pre-diabetes for up to 10 to 12 years before the diagnosis. So the fact that we're focused on the glucose going out of control just shows that we are very short-sighted. We're not looking at the pure cause of disease. And the reason I'm so focused on the insulin resistance, I'm an endocrinologist, so that's my field. But insulin happens to be the unifying issue with about 70% of diseases. I don't want to take too much time, but I could go through all of them. It's a total tree of diseases where insulin is the trunk.
Right.
Hyperinsulinemia.
All right. Thank you. And Nia, what questions does the audience have for our CEO, Naveen Jain, and for Dr. Tandon?
We've got a whole bunch. Let's dive in.
Awesome.
Enrique asked, how do you measure diversity of the gut biome? And is there any correlation between gut and soil where the food is grown?
Yes. So first of all, there are two types of diversity. One is simply what organisms are there, which I think is a poor way of measuring the diversity. The right way of measuring the diversity is what are the different metabolites, what are the different type of enzymes and amino acids that are being produced by these microbes. The more diversity of that, the better, because then you have a lot of the things that body can work with. So, it can produce the butyrate, all the short chain fatty acid. But then you want to make sure that a whole bunch of other nutrients that your microbes are producing, and they use the food as a substrate. Remember, food is simply the information. Food is not some magical thing. There are some chemical compounds. And at the end of the day, our body is simply math and chemistry. There is a whole bunch of chemical factory. The microbes are taking the substrate from the food and changing that and pooping out their stuff. So let's just be very clear. The human body is simply made of micro poops. That takes the microbiome poop, we absorb it, and that's actually what we get a lot of the nutrients from.
Pam asked, in each of the gut biome studies, what is the male-female mix in the study group?
So in general, it's about 55-45, but when we do the clinical research, we tend to actually make them 50-50. But in our customer population, it's 55% female and 45% male. And by the way, we have over 250,000 people that we have analyzed in the last couple of years alone.
Where are your supplements made, and are they organic?
Yeah, 100% organic, GMO, all that good stuff made in Texas. So everything is made in United States with the highest quality ingredients. And by the way, not only that, since every single capsule is made for each person, we test each time. That means it actually takes us about 12 days. We test every single ingredient is tested before we put them in a capsule. After we put them there, we test for 3 days to make sure that there is absolutely no contamination, and it's 100% of exactly what we expected the customer to get.
And how young do you recommend starting Viome?
In general, we prefer I think the earliest you start to adjust your gut, the better you are all your life. In fact, from the time the human is born, a baby, that's the first day to actually start, because you want to understand if you can adjust the gut microbiome in the early days. The best time actually is to do when the mother is pregnant. And if you can get the mother's microbiome to be adjusted, that is going to be the best shot that you have for kid to be healthy. So really adjusting the gut microbiome for the mother and then continuing with the child, because a lot of the early microbial exposure for a child comes from a baby going through the birth canal and also from the mother's breast milk.
We did have another member ask about more detail in the research you've done on pregnant women and young children.
Yeah, so we actually have continued to do a large study on the women from the time that they conceive all the end of first 2 years of child. That research is ongoing, and we have not published papers on that, but we continue to collect the data for every trimester and the first 2 years of child, including collecting the mother's breast milk, because a lot of the times, the antibodies and the microbial microbes are actually being passed to the baby through the mother's breast milk. But what's really interesting here is that if you think about it, the first few days of mother's breast milk is oligosaccharide that cannot be digested by the human body. It is there purely for the gut microbes. So imagine what nature is telling you, that to keep this new offspring that just came out, the best way to keep this offspring healthy is to not to feed it, but to feed them. And that tells you how gut microbes are not just a part of us, they are essential foundation of what makes us human. And we are a walking, talking ecosystem where there are trillions, 100 trillion of them. And if you look at all the genes that are expressed in the human body, about 2 million genes are coming from our microbes, which are not just bacteria, the yeast, the fungus, and the viruses and phages, and only 20,000 protein coding genes that comes from our mom and dad.
Yeah, it's amazing. People don't realize we have some 30 to 40 trillion human cells, 100 trillion non-human cells. The human body is really a mechanism for transporting microbes around.
That's right. They may have created us to actually pour them around so we can spread them every time we poop everywhere, we spread them around, right? So they created us to spread them around.
As we head to the moon and Mars, we'll take them along with us.
Exactly.
Nia.
Daniel asked, do you have enough data from Viome users that following the suggestions have decreased their biological age?
Many. And so in fact, as I said, we now have over 250,000 people. And in fact, we have shown that, in fact, not only people who followed our recommendations and supplements reduce the biological age. In fact, the people who are on different type of fat diet, they tend to be the worst performers of biological age. The people who, and I'm going to probably get killed for saying it, the keto diet in our thing, by the way, this is based on 100,000 users. We published a paper in Cell. It is going to be coming out. People on a keto diet were the worst offender of biological age, followed by the paleo diet. And the best people who performed best on the biological age were people who were plant-based diet, a vegan diet. And Peter, you switched over to vegan diet mostly, right?
Well, I've gone back and forth. I was a vegan diet for 2 years, and then I went to a keto diet. And I've gone slowly back towards a vegan diet. And I buy it. I do buy the notion that whole plants, I do include protein in it, but it's all about, I mean, there's one thing, everybody, please remember, I don't care which diet you're on, just remove sugar from your diet. That's the most important thing.
By the way, there's no such thing as universal healthy food or universal healthy food, but I can tell you that there is always universal unhealthy food, and the sugar is just universal unhealthy.
Yeah, Naveen always gives me a hard time because his biological age apparently was younger than mine.
We faced off on that one too.
Yeah.
All right, Nia, back to you.
Next question, how does exercise affect the microbiome?
So exercise actually shown to impact the microbiome, but what is really fascinating is that it tends to be temporary. So when you stop working out, exercising, it actually goes back. So it really has a temporary transient impact on microbiome. So if you're regularly exercising, you actually do have a significant impact on microbiome.
Nice. And by the way, these are great questions from the community, just really excellent questions. Nia.
What do you know about the rumor that those with celiac disease can eat bread in Europe when the American bread creates a reaction?
First of all, it is not the bread, there are different types of bread. So the gluten, celiac disease comes from a gluten sensitivity. And a lot of the things, there is still a lot of research to be shown, but I think there's a lot of research starting to show that the gut microbial activities, and in fact, there was a research paper that shows when there is a certain virus that is active in the gut and when it is exposed to gluten, it actually releases the toxin that causes the early onset of the celiac diseases, right? But once you have the celiac disease, until you can get rid of this virus, you actually will continue to have a celiac disease. So I think the gluten sensitivity is something that we'll have to deal with when people have a celiac disease. In Europe, why people have less of a celiac disease, but I cannot honestly imagine whether you're European or in America, if you have a celiac disease, there is no way you can actually tolerate gluten, period.
Our member Marino asked, a family member had a stroke and seems trapped on blood thinners for life, while limited in what new things they can try that the doctor isn't sure about. What hope might your service offer to people in such a seeming trap?
This is really the tough one because I don't want to give people any hope when people are desperate, because that is just a bad thing, because we just don't have enough science to tell you that people who are on a blood thinner, somehow things will magically improve. But all I can tell you is that taking the Viome test and following the recommendation, it won't harm you. But I will never ever promise you that it's going to actually solve the issue.
Well, we do know that inflammation is a precursor for stroke. And so we're actively looking at, coming up with the precursor for inflammation, which totally would reduce the risk of manifestation of stroke.
That is in fact true, but I was talking blood thinner. I just don't know how blood. I know the inflammation will come down, that we can do, because a lot of the stuff we focus on is the root cause of most chronic diseases. As Damon, you said, is the chronic inflammation is a root cause of chronic diseases. And we fundamentally focus on reducing the inflammation, both in the gut, and then we measure your inflammation. By the way, Peter, I think you asked me that in the host side. So when we analyze the blood, we're looking at all the cytokines. We're looking at every single inflammatory marker. We're looking at every single transcript that's coming out of the blood cell, whether it is the mitochondrial transcript or the human transcript. So we do see everything that's happening in the human body, and that's how we are able to focus on reducing the inflammation, which tends to be the root cause of almost all other diseases.
Next question, how do medications affect the microbiome, and how can I keep mine healthy while on, let's say, antibiotics?
So first of all, antibiotics is the worst possible medicine, even though it saves lives. But when you take them, you literally are throwing a nuclear bomb inside your body. It gets the bad guy, but also gets everyone else, right? So it is very, very tough on a gut microbiome, your oral microbiome. It really changes everything. So if you're on constant antibiotics, there is, it's just tough. You have to constantly rewild your gut. That means you should be eating as many types of fermented food as you possibly can, taking your probiotics, taking your prebiotics, and really taking a diversity of fermented food. So kimchi and yogurt and pickles and every possible fermented food you can eat. Kombucha, more fermented food, the better. In terms of medicine, microbes digest your medicine. So, certain set of microbes actually will prevent the diseases from the drugs from working. Right? So levodopa can actually be completely metabolized or actually eaten away by microbes releasing tyrosine. Same type of thing happen in digoxin, and same type of things happen even metformin. Metformin fundamentally changes the microbiome, and that is literally how the metformin works through microbiome, reducing the glucose response rather than directly into the blood.
A member asked, after taking the test and answering what I ate in the last meal, I have noticed that most of my sensitivity foods were what I ate in the last meal before the test. How much does it affect the results?
It does not actually, because we in fact have published a paper that shows that people's microbiome does not change, or their microbial activity does not change if you're continuing to eat a similar food over a time. So we actually took people over 30 days and we measured their gut microbiome every single day, and we saw no noticeable difference until you change your diet significantly over a period of time. So if you were a vegan, went on a completely a diet on a meat, or you were a meat eater, went on a vegan, over 3 months, your microbiome will change. But if you're constantly eating different foods every day, and it's mostly the similar type of diet, it's like throwing a pebble on a lake. You get a tiny bit of ripples, but it comes right back to exactly the same ecosystem. Remember, changing the ecosystem is energetically very, very hard, right? So in a sense, the microbes are not going to suddenly start changing what they are expressing, because that's going to change a massive amount of transformation has to happen. So until there is a significant change in the substrate that is coming over a long period of time, it does not change itself.
Great. Nia.
Can you go into more detail on the research you are currently doing on microbiome?
Where are you going next?
First of all, I'm sorry?
Where are you guys going next?
Oh, so first of all, Peter, obviously we are continuing to add more and more depth, doing more and more clinical research. So we are working on now with Mayo Clinic on insomnia and obesity. We are working with Advent Health on a lot of the metabolic diseases, including insulin resistance and diabetes. We are working with on other institutes on pancreatic cancer, bile cancer, colorectal cancer. So in addition to the thing, we're constantly looking at how does a gut microbiome is impacting mental health, digestive diseases, and also the metabolic diseases, right? And the inflammatory diseases such as autoimmune diseases or other immune health issues that people have. Most of our clinical trials are there to show the underlying root cause of diseases, including aging, cancer and chronic diseases. And then we try to understand the mechanism of action, what causes the diseases to happen, and can we use the food and supplements to actually reverse them, or can we or sometimes we have to develop a drug, whether it's a monoclonal antibody, small molecule, or a vaccine, to be able to actually reverse it.
Malwina asked, I have ordered Viome Health Kit and I'm very excited. I did my tests today. My only concern is my data safe? Could you please address the data privacy and how the company is using my data, also with relation to third-party companies?
So first of all, we don't sell any data to anyone. Every single data that we get, first of all, remember it's a mRNA, so it's constantly changing. Unlike a DNA, which is actually assigned to you, mRNA is constantly changing. So even if 2 years later somebody, God forbid, got access to the data, it will be very different than the one you had before, right? But more importantly, not only we safeguard the data, but remember, we use the unanonymized data to be able to understand at a population level why people are developing insulin resistance, why people are developing these different diseases, and that allows us to help the humanity move forward. So yes, not only you benefit yourself, you are benefiting from the 250,000 people who came before you, and you're contributing to the ecosystem. So the billions of people who are going to come after you also benefit from our understanding and our better AI that is constantly improving itself based on the feedback loop that we get from you.
You know, this is only possible today by the massive amount of computational power and the machine learning algorithms that are being done. And we've talked about this before, that it's critically important for you to be looking at what data you can collect and what insights you can create, no matter what business you're in. But just the amount of data that you've been able to gather from these simple at-home tests have been just extraordinary.
And by the way, the flywheel effect is really the key to any success. That means you want to be able to benefit from everyone in that ecosystem, because that is you start with a population level knowledge, and then it becomes N of 1. So if we find that something doesn't work for Peter, we don't give up. We say, okay, this is interesting case, and we keep giving you different recommendations until that works for you. And then we learn from that, and that make that a population level knowledge. So everyone who comes after you doesn't have to go through the same trial and error. And that's the reason that 250,000 people who came before you is making your recommendations so much better.
Yeah.
Daniel asked, Naveen, are you vegan or vegetarian? If not, why not? And would Viome tell me if it's best for me to be vegan or not?
So we actually, in my case, I happen to be vegan, but in your case, we will tell you what foods are good or bad. So we are not about, pushing for one diet or other. So for example, if your production of trimethylamine, which is produced by the gut microbiome from the carnitine that comes from the red meat, if your TMA production is very, very low, then we will say if you want to eat red meat, you can, because ultimately what happens is the TMA gets absorbed in the blood, and your liver transforms that into TMAO, trimethylamine oxide, which is what causes the heart disease. So if your production of TMA is low, we will say it's okay for you to eat red meat if you want to, but we're not the one who are we're making a judgment whether you should or should not.
Naveen, I have to say, I have 2 universities, International Space University and Singularity University, but I don't have a medical degree university I can give you, but man, oh man, have you gotten your MD in the course the last 5, 6 years? It's extraordinary.
Thank you. Thank you, brother.
Yeah.
Eva asked, I feel extremely good and have none of the issues not anymore thanks to another therapy and healthy food that you are mentioning on your website. Why should I do the test, or for whom is your test specifically?
Well, first of all, I think you are the right person to be thinking about. Remember, do you want to wait until you actually have the symptoms? Because by the time you get the symptoms, your body has suffered enough damage actually for you to be able to feel it. And most of the time, by the way, you don't even know you have a symptom or not until you get rid of it. And the best thing I can give you example of my wife. she told me the same thing. Look, I'm healthy. I don't need this Viome test. And I convinced her to do the test. And she comes back 30 days later. She said, you know what? It's amazing. I now just don't need to rest in the afternoon. And she thought that was part of her thing. Hey, afternoon, you get 10 minutes nap and you feel good. And now she said, I just don't get tired anymore. And she didn't think she had an issue when she needed a 10 minutes nap until they went away. And she said, wow, I just have so much more energy. And then she tells me very nicely that all my baby fat is gone. And any man who knows, there is no good answer to that. When she said, all my baby fat is gone, all I say was, what baby fat? I never noticed it.
Well, thank Anu for being a good sport on that. All right, Nia.
We've had members from Germany, South America, Asia, and Canada so far today reach out and ask, is Viome available in those countries?
Well, Viome is available in some of the countries, especially in UK, Canada, and France and Germany, but it's not available in Asia and a few other countries yet. And if there are enough people in a particular country, we will make sure that we actually make it available to those countries.
We have a creative question from Carl. Are there any plans on turning these tests into an all-inclusive device? And if so, what could that be? And is the technology ready to empower small devices to this level? He also uses the example of, could it be a smart toothbrush to take the test? How far away are we from these kinds of products?
Well, first of all, we do a complete transcriptomics, metatranscriptomics. That means every single gene expression is being analyzed. That means the sequencer, the Illumina sequencer, that's the massive, has to come down to a small size. And I really think over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to start to see, as Peter will tell you, the smart toilets that will analyze your urine, it will analyze your stool, and they're going to be toothbrushes, they're going to be analyzing your saliva. And so there are a lot of these things going to happen. We, in fact, are starting to work on a microfluidic technology that'll be able to put the whole lab in probably a size of a shoebox today, but someday size of a cell phone. That means literally your toothbrush can be attached to your cell phone and analyze your saliva. It can analyze most biological sample, your urine, stool, blood, everything. So I think in the next decade or so, the microfluidics, especially the electrical microfluidics, will be able to do most of the job that is being currently done in the lab outside.
So let's take a second and before we wrap up here and provide a vision of where we're going, because I think it's really important for people to start to pull these threads together. We can imagine a future within this decade in which your entire transcriptomics of your blood, your gut, your body, and so forth, your proteomics, what's going on, is constantly being measured by a series of devices that are on your body, in your body, near your body, and all of that's being fed to your AI. And your AI understands your genomics, it understands your history, it understands cohorts like you, and then is able to literally say, if you say, I'm hungry, I need a snack, be able to deliver what is the best meal, either from a nutritional standpoint or from a minimal, since we have Damon on, endocrinological disruption standpoint. And we will 3D print a meal that is the meal that is ideal for you to have, right? We'll catch in these diagnostics any signs of cancer or gut disease early. I mean, this is where we're heading. These are the early days still, where it's manual to take the tests and you do it every couple of months versus every day versus continuous. But I mean, this is the future we're heading to. It's continuous monitoring to optimize your health every second of the day passively. And like you said, you'll have the choice to, if you want to ask your AI, what is the best food? I'm hungry, I want something savory, what should I eat? It can tell you.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think, Peter, as you said, it's, I think today the things we do to our body will be considered criminal or considered, like putting leeches in our body, right? We literally puncture our veins to draw the blood out. One day we won't have to do that because, our nanobots in our body is going to be analyzing and sending the signals, maintaining everything good. So I think that a lot of the things that we do today are going to improve to a point where we won't even know it are not part of our body because it's constantly sending signal. Because your body knows what it needs to keep itself healthy. It's sending a signal, and all Viome does is listening to the language of your body, what it's telling you, and we translate that into human language. Don't eat your spinach and broccoli, instead eat this, right? So we take the language of the body and body chemistry and tell you in the words of what foods and supplements your body needs to stay itself to be in a perfect optimal shape.
Damon, you want to add a couple words to close us out here?
Yeah, I mean, you made a great point, Peter. It's really over the last, say, 10 years, we've realized the importance of continual assessment. A good example is in diabetes, we now, have continuous glucose monitors that are following the sugar every 5 minutes over the day. And we're able to treat the patient much more eloquently than before when we took just a finger stick, right? So it's the whole idea is that the more data we have, the more time points we have, the more chance we're going to have to decode disease. And so it's a great point that you have that you made.
So everybody, listen, I want to thank Naveen and Damon for joining us. Before I do that, our next webinar is going to be Thursday, this coming Thursday in 2 days. I'll be on with the founder and CEO of a company called CureBase, also a bold capital company, and they're decentralizing clinical trials so that any patient anywhere in the world can participate. We're also going to be doing Zoom breakouts tomorrow. So Zoom breakouts tomorrow. What do you think of Viome? I mean, are you going to experiment with it? Naveen, where do they go? Is there a discount code you can offer up?
Yes, Peter. So first of all, they can go to viome.com. I don't quite have a discount code, but how about this? I will send it off to you, and you guys go ahead and send it to the.
Can we set it as abundance maybe or something? And
we'll do abundance, and we will make sure that everybody gets a discount with a code abundance. So look for it. It will be set up in the next 10 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Naveen, Damon, thank you, everybody. Zoom rooms tomorrow and on Thursday, July 22nd at 1 o'clock Pacific. I'll be with the CEO of CureBase. Cannot go without saying happy Apollo 11 day. Today is the day we landed on the moon in 1969. And were you up at 6 a.m. watching Jeff Bezos fly?
I sure did, Peter. And in fact, it was such a great thing to watch him go there. And it's only, 10 minutes flight. But watching the, young man and an old woman, oldest woman and the youngest man at the same time with Jeff, and the beautiful hat that he was wearing, can't forget that.
It was awesome. I hope you guys all enjoyed that too. We'll talk about that at our next AMA. But again, Naveen and Damon, thank you for joining us. Check out Viome.com, Viome. See you guys very soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Peter.